to talk about something that you want to talk about.
One day while I was volunteering at hospice, I was sitting at the front desk working, and they had a list of names for everybody that was an inpatient. And one of the names I recognized. And I remembered them as an old neighbor, and I knew it was them. And that was an odd thing. Because it was, yeah, even though I didn't have that many interactions with them, it was somebody that I had at some point seen walking their dog in the neighborhood. But it kind of struck me because on the list they had, a certain number of available rooms. And even then, they just kind of seemed like a number. And whenever he died, they just put an X.
My greatest fear? Losing all my money, which I'm doing right now. I mean, I have been flooded and I spent more than half of my nest egg, and it's a little bit late in my life to start saving again. And that's one of my worst fear. The other fear is I get being hated or being disapproved of my own children, of my own family, and so on.
I would say my biggest fear is being forgotten, or like not leaving a lasting mark, that represents my life if after I'm gone,
I think my greatest fear is living alone, which I'm doing now. And I worried about that before, and it's hard to live alone. And you do have that fear, even though you put your trust in God and say, I'm gonna leave it up to Him, but I still have that little fear all the time of, am I gonna be able to make it alone?
As an individual that was born with a congenital heart defect, my greatest fear in life is just how that'll play out. We do know that eventually one day I'll have to have a valve replacement, and that'll be a major surgery, an open heart surgery. So just kind of when that's going to happen and how it's going to play out and where I'm going to be at in life when that time comes is kind of fearful and concerning.
Greatest fear would probably, for me, be not succeeding. So being successful for me would be defined as, I guess, not pleasing my parents or my family, making people that I love disappointed in me, I guess, yeah. And I am also very afraid of death and what's going to happen in the afterlife, I really have no idea, so I don't know. It kind of scares me just to think about it.
My greatest fear would be
being separated from my family, in the sense of not being in the same area or place with them, but also a fear of leaving this earth.
It is the infinite nothing that gets to me, honestly. It really is. It's just tough for me to not only comprehend, but just come to terms with, you know, like I just can't. I don't want to believe that there is nothing, you know. I don't want to believe that because obviously, you know, we live our lives here waiting for the next day, you know, in the future and stuff, and thinking or believing that there is nothing to come after one day is just a scary thought for me.
Fear of death for me is entirely biological. Intellectually, I have no fear of death.
I was always practical about it. I never thought that I ever could die.
Like from the moment that I can remember, I understood that I could die.
I mean, everyone growing up has a dog or a fish or a family member that dies, and that's how you teach your kid about death. And you prefer to teach your kid about that with like a goldfish as opposed to grandma.
We were always taught that, you know, when Jesus was ready to take you, he would take you, and you think about those things, but it doesn't until something happens, comes real. When I lost my father, that was my first real experience with losing a loved one in mortality.
I am the only girl out of 3 boys, and like she was the other girl in our family out of like all male children, so that was hard. So it was a couple of years ago, and that's the first time I ever remember someone dying close to me. I guess what affected me most about my cousin's death is just how close we were and how I wouldn't be able to see her again. So
I think back on the first experience I had of death, and it was my grandfather, and I think I was around 5 or 6. It was my grandfather on my dad's side. I was very close to him. He was just friendly towards me. I would play doctor with him and put calamine lotion on his hands, and he was very kind and considerate. Well, he had a heart attack and suddenly died. And there was a funeral, but I wasn't allowed to go because I was a little child. And I remember I cried and cried. To this day, I remember it because I wanted to say goodbye to him. But it was decided that I couldn't go, and it was my grandmother who had decided that because she said it wasn't proper. So there's an anticipation one day I get to see him again in the heavenly kingdom. And so I realized then that people leave and don't come back, and how death is so abrupt a change.
Going from being able to see her and like knowing that she's there, knowing what she does and like how she fits into my life, to her not being around and like seeing how it affects everybody, and then like thinking there's nothing I can attach to that, like, oh, this is my great grandmother, like this is who she was, this is what she did her whole life. But and I guess that's why I was like, if I live the same way, then pretty soon down the line, like 100 years from now, 200 years from now, no one will know who I am because I just did the same things all day, every day. Like, didn't try and like expand my life.
The first time I ever truly felt my own mortality,
I was probably 6 or 7, and I was at my friend's house, and he had a top over his pool because it was the winter. We were running around his pool, and I fell into his pool. And I remember looking up, and they always told you, you know, like whenever those tops close, you can't get back out, you know. So I was looking up, and I remember seeing that top close, and I'm like, holy shit! If I don't start swimming up, that's gonna be the end for me. But yeah, obviously I'm here, so I made it up to the top. Yeah. So that was probably the first time that I realized that we are mortal beings.
My church community, there was a fire at somebody's camp, and the house went up, and 2 like toddlers, and they died. They burned to death, and you kind of hope that they died in their sleep from inhalation, which I think is what the coroner told people. Whether that's actually what happened, or if they just tell them that to make you feel better, I don't know. But like they were there with like their grandparents, and their grandfather died in the fire, and I think the grandmother had burns and like fell out of a window and like smashed her head, and she eventually died. I remember being a sophomore in high school, and that kind of messing with me pretty good.
If you're asking me if I believe in existence after you die, most certainly. Most certainly.
I like have floating theories about what happens after you die. Like, I guess, you know, maybe there's heaven, maybe there's reincarnation. I don't know. I guess I'll see when I get there. That's like what I say every time. It's like, when I get there, I guess I'll know. But
I think for the most part, now there are other uses for religion, or at least there used to be, even if they are not any longer. But religion is a coping mechanism. God is the imaginary friend that it's okay to have. You know, by age 12, Santa Claus is ripped away from you along with the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny. But we cultivate a belief in something warm and fuzzy. It's just something that humans naturally do. And somewhere along the line, religion just never got cut, is how I look at it.
I was teaching at St. Peter's in Covington, and I met a lady there who was in charge of the aftercare program, who was a single mom, but she was maybe in her mid-60s. So she was working, and she was a very hard worker, but you could tell her health wasn't in the best of shape. She had a son in the military far away, but we got to be really close in the sense of sharing, just talking. And then one day, she got really sick and went in the hospital. And then she died shortly after that. And I remember at school the next day after she passed away, I prayed with the little children and prayed for Miss Susan to be at peace with our Lord, and that our Lord would give her all the happiness that she hadn't experienced in this life. And then I took the little children and we were crossing over to the other side of the school for the dismissal. And as I was standing there, I just suddenly got this strong impression of Miss Susan being by me, because she always worked outside with the kids, and we were outside waiting to cross. And all of a sudden, this little bird landed on me, a baby bird landed on me, like landed. And all the little kids were like, look, look. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then from my shoulder, it just went right on the ground. And I scooped the little bird up, and it just stayed in my hand. And I felt like it was a sign from God that Miss Susan was happy. She was in a place of great happiness. Everyone said, all of my kids who heard about it, and my little students said, that was Miss Susan. Miss Susan was telling you that she's in a good place. She's with us. And I thought, that's true. That really is what's happening there.
I would say the dealing with death, you either dealt with it or you haven't. You're either ready for it or you're not.
I don't have big feelings about God or something. I mean, when I'm not feeling well and I think about God, I say, oh, no, he don't care for me, he has forgot me. But it is without any self-pity. That's just my situation, and so I just accept things. I think that, like a plant or something, you live a certain time, and when you can't take it anymore, or when your physiques can't take it anymore, you're dead.
Yeah, and that terrifies me. Like, I can't imagine nothing. Like, the thought of being alive and having a consciousness and then just going to nothing is just like, I can't imagine that for some reason.
I want to believe that there is an afterlife. Like, I just want to believe it, because I don't want this to be the end, you know? I really don't. We have a finite amount of time on this earth, and I don't want it to be finite. I want it to be infinite, you know? I want to live forever.
You know, I'm okay with that. I think I'm ready. Whenever he's ready to call me, I'm ready to go. That's just how I feel. I'm not afraid of it. I just hope I'm going to be brave when the time gets there.